Hello again, we're back. So today is the 2nd of December. Hard to believe we're in December, but I've got on my steampunk hat, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that term first off. This is reading and writing for adults, and I do want to introduce you to a couple more of the books that I find very fascinating, and I urge you to find them either in print or online. There's hundreds of sites that talk about steampunk. This one is the 1,000 Steampunk Creations. And let me define the term steampunk. When I was teaching, I believe it was my 7th grade class at Conti, every Christmas time, December for me was the time to read Christmas stories. And we always read some Charles Dickens during December. And of course, we read The Christmas Carol with Scrooge and the 3 ghosts that come to visit him because he's so greedy and stingy with his money and things like that. But Charles Dickens did a lot of stories that are very worthwhile. And another one we often taught was Oliver Twist, because it talked a lot about how some people in the world are very wealthy and other people are very poor. And that's a good story, Oliver Twist, to be talking about what drives people to steal even, and things like that. So you have a better sense of why people do what they do and become what they do because of poverty. Charles Dickens is a great read during this time of December. But getting back to steampunk, this time period in the Victorian age is also the time when a lot of inventions occurred. And so you get the Fulton's steamboat, and you get the steam engine on trains. And so the idea that you could actually make something move with heating water is a technological advancement at the time. And the idea of steampunk actually comes out of looking back at a lot of movies and books that talk about things during that time period. And something that was never listed in our list of authors to introduce our students to is our Jules Verne books, which I love. And they're science fiction, Earth to the Moon and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So if you can think of anything that Jules Verne ever did, it's steampunk, according to that term that is used now. I've got my Victorian hat. There's feathers. There's a lot of hats, the tall hats. The idea of bicycles becoming motorized cars during this time period, where you'd wear goggles instead of having a windshield. You'd have goggles to wear, and just new inventions and even I'll show you some pictures so you'll understand a little more when I'm talking about steampunk. But what I want to really talk about for my ABE language arts class is we're still talking about what are we reading and how are we writing about what we experience. And it still falls into the category of nonfiction and fiction. So some of the things that were conceived of during the 1800s actually started way back in the 1600s, and that's where I'm going to go today. back into the 1600s, because that time period, the 17th century, remember, 17th century means 1600s. That time period is when modern science, as we know it now, actually begins. And what I want to also show you is this book. It's called The Clockwork Universe by Edward Dolnick. Another really good read to explain, and actually it calms me to read this book during the time of COVID, because this book is a really good book that tells you about these famous scientists that we've all heard of, but the fact that when they're coming up with their beliefs about how the world actually works, there's a lot going on, which I guess at that time would not been thought of as superstition. A lot of things that were happening to people were perceived as happening because God was not happy with humans. And so you end up with plagues, and you end up with disease, and the general population believes that it's a punishment from God because of the way people were living in that time period. So I want to go into what the scientists are doing. A lot of them are on their own. They're not even called scientists during the 1600s. They're called philosophers. And they're not the first. There were Greek and Roman philosophers too. You have the Hippocrates, and you get the Hippocratic oath that doctors take to do no harm. With whatever you come up with for your answer on why things happen, why people die, you give them medicine that you think will help them, but you should do no harm. So there were philosophers, as I say, before the 1600s, but these people that I'm going to introduce you to today are those people who sat down and thought, and they said, and they asked questions, and we should all take a lesson from them on how they came up with the answers they did. Some work from a premise that actually turns out to be inaccurate, but they actually, along the way, do find new discoveries, and others pick it up at that point and carry it forward to find out that our world is bigger than anyone even imagined. So the 1600s are believed to be accurately described as the beginning of modern science, where we find out you didn't just die because God punished you. You died because of these little tiny animals that scientists during the time found in a microscope that he invented. He found a whole new world. Nobody knew about cells and things like that at that time. So let's just go to the whiteboard, and I've written sort of a timeline that I'd like to go over. So if we could switch to the whiteboard, perhaps. No whiteboard. Okay, so all right. Well, you can follow along. We're going to, if you can perceive what kind of a world it's like, you've got in 1492. I think that's like the earliest I want to go. 1492 is when Columbus actually comes from the old world and comes over and finds America. Now, the neat thing about Columbus, we can debate on whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, because now we even have controversy over Columbus Day. People were here. The native people were here in America, as we talked about last week. But when Columbus sails away from the coast of Spain, he believes something to be true. He believes that the world is round. Not many people in that time period believed that. They believed the earth was flat, and if you traveled too far, you fell off. And it sounds funny, sounds ridiculous to us now, but people believe that. And one of the major things that Columbus did is, oh, thank you, there's the whiteboard. Good. So if you think about 1492, that's almost 1500, right? But he discovers America. But again, I would say his ability to believe that the earth was round and stick with it and endanger himself and his crew to sail off in an westerly direction to find India was based on his belief, his scientific belief that the world was round. After that, in 1543, you have a scientist called Copernicus. And some of these are also publishing, so they're writers who write scientific books and journals, and they publish what they come up with as far as what they believe to be so. Now, Copernicus publishes On the Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres, which says that the planets circle the sun rather than the earth. Again, another thing that's not widely believed. The church at the time believed that the earth was the center and all the planets and the sun revolved around the earth. And for those who believed otherwise, they soon run into big trouble with the Catholic Church because they consider this heresy and they are convicted of crimes against the church and God. But again, at this time, we're talking Shakespeare too. So it helps, I think, sometimes when you're in a certain field, we're talking science right here, but it helps you to know what the environment is where these scientists are coming up with their theories. In 1564, you have Shakespeare born, and 1564, Galileo's born. So Shakespeare is known for his literature, right, in the English field. Galileo is known for his work in science. Let's see. In 1571, I guess we lost our, oh, there we are. 1571, a man named Kepler is born, and we'll talk more about him. His first name is Johann Kepler. He's 1571. And then you have 1600, Shakespeare writes Hamlet. I think maybe the world could have been a little better off if we also had pushed what Kepler and Copernicus had published. Maybe we'd know more science than we do about Shakespeare. But so be it. They're all contemporaries. In 1609, Kepler publishes his first two laws about the paths of planets as they orbit the sun. So he believes that the sun is in the center of the universe, and he actually identifies 6 planets. So this is in 1609. Galileo in 1610 turns a telescope to the heavens, and he agrees with Kepler there's other planets out there. And again, he's another one that believes that the planets revolve around the sun, not the earth. In 1616, Shakespeare dies. All right, let me get to my next page. All right, so there are, of course, wars that take place during the 1600s. The 30 Years' War is in 1618 through 1648. So you've got 30 years of war happening. Again, you've still got the scientists pursuing their questions. Let me see if I can get this straight for you. In 1619, during that war, Kepler publishes his third law, which tells how the planets orbit and relate to each other. He knows something's happening between the planets, and but he's working with six. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have to figure out how this works. There we go. 1630, Kepler dies. In 1633, we have the Inquisition, and this is when Galileo is put on trial. He's considered to be committing the crime of heresy to suggest that the planets are going around the sun, including the Earth, and that the Earth is not the center of the universe. And so there's a scientist whose belief was true, but he goes on, he's brought to court, and they tell him he's got to say that he's making it up or whatever. He has to change it. Other people are starting to believe him, and he refuses. In 1637, we have a philosopher who is Descartes. He declares, "I think, therefore I am." And in that book, he starts talking about his mathematical computations that he calls coordinate geometry. So not only are we getting science that's becoming very prominent, scientific questions and experiments to get an answer, we're starting to see the beginning of upper math. So we're talking trig, geometry, algebra, and we're going to talk about calculus too. In 1642, I guess as humans, we just can't stay in a peaceful time for long. The English have their Civil War in 1642 to 1651. In 1642, Galileo dies, and as soon as he dies, the new Galileo, some people called it, there's Isaac Newton, who's born. 1646, a man named Leibniz is also born. And these two, Leibniz is 4 years younger, these two battle it out throughout their whole life because these two believed they had come up with calculus. Now, I don't know about you, but I never had calculus. I know it's upper math. I never needed it. I never knew what it was exactly, but I am going to talk to you a little bit about why we need calculus and why these two were fighting about it. But that's when 1642 and 1646. King Charles, who's the head of England, is beheaded in 1649. So we can say right off the bat, this is a time of savagery when even a king can be beheaded. You know, this is what the kind of environment these scientists are working in. A couple more dates that I think are important. In 1616, think how long ago that is. 1616, I'll move it down. 1616, in England, the official founding of the Royal Society. This is a group of men, women got invited later on, but it was like a think tank, and it was very respected. It still exists. Some of you may or may not know, I attend OLLI meetings. If you are 50 and over, I'll give a little commercial for OLLI. They reside at Berkshire Community College, and they have sessions where you pay $60 a year, and then you can sign up for these talks. All of them are on Zoom now, but the one I love is the science one because they're retired scientists and doctors, and one of my favorite one is called Science Conversations, and the doctor is a neurosurgeon who is actually a member of the Royal Society. So it's something where what they learn during their lifetime, they discuss certain things that, certain procedures. We look at the New York Times and things like that. So it's a wonderful experience to talk to the leaders of their fields and ask them questions about what do they think about certain medical things and scientific things that are happening now. But that's the Royal Society of London, started in 1660. In 1664, we have Newton's miracle years, where he claims he invents calculus and calculates gravity's pull on the moon. So this is, again, it's hard for me to imagine. I don't know if you can see why I'm so excited about this, but it's such a long time ago that you sort of, right off the bat, you say, well, how on earth did he come up with being able to figure out gravity's pull on the moon? You know, it just boggles my mind, but he's a genius. So, but in 1665, plague strikes London, and thousands and thousands of people die. Then you have the Great Fire of London, and notice what's in these dates. 666. Remember, we're in a country, in a world who really reads their Bible every single day. They don't have a lot of people who can read, but the ones that read are reading the Bible. When the year 1665 comes, even 1664, they're looking for that number. 666 is when the Antichrist is going to come back to the earth. Anybody who's reading their Bible believes this. So you start seeing all of the predictions from the prophets where they're saying pestilence and war and all kind of bad things are going to happen and people are going to die and the sun is going to go out and the moon is going to turn red and all sorts of things are going to go bad. So when 1664 starts, when people are starting to really get very nervous in the streets of London, that's when Newton is looking up to the stars, trying to figure out what is the actual force of gravity on the moon. So what's happening on Earth isn't even in his mind. He's thinking about the heavens. No wonder they're looking up into the heavens, because look what's going on down below. You've got a plague, the Great Fire of London that burns most of London down, is happening at the same time. In 1674, we have a man who is known as the inventor of the microscope, and he says in his journal that he has discovered a hidden world of little animals. So all of these geniuses, whether it's in their mind, whether they're working sort of alone but in tandem, because you need the devices to be able to look not only in a drop of water, but to use a telescope to look up into the heavens and find planets. So things are happening all over there in scientists' mind, and great discoveries are happening, but there's such horrible situations on the earth during this time that it's hard to even imagine the two working together in the same century. 1675, Newton becomes a member of the Royal Society. Now that suggests that people are starting to believe Newton. They appreciate what Newton has done with his calculus and his calculations. So they are honoring him as you have to be invited into the Royal Society. This other man in 1675, for a whole year, claims, no, I discovered calculus, and he stole it from me. So then now you've got a controversy between Newton, who has his other laws of motion, and Leibniz, who says, no, I discovered it and Newton stole it from me. And in 1684, he publishes an account of his calculus theory of calculating, and then the battle is on. In 1684, Halley, the one who Halley's Comet is named after, he visits Newton at Cambridge. Two scientists, now they're going to work together because Halley really wants to get with Newton because he knows he can calculate movement up in the heavens, and he's been watching stars that move. They don't know exactly what a comet is, but they call it Halley's Comet when it comes to visit. In 1687, Newton publishes another scientific book, and he calls it Principia, and it describes the system of the world. And so that's out there. It does seem once they publish, then they get more, they have more popularity because they put it in print. So those who can read. And around this time, you're seeing people moving away from the Bible accounts to scientific journals. And they start saying, oh, this is the reason why this is happening according to this scientist. According to Newton, he says this is why things are happening. Not because God's punishing us, it's because there's an order to things. There's a reason for things. In 1696, Newton leaves Cambridge and moves to London. In 1692 through 1722, Newton and Leibniz and supporters of both men battle over this idea of calculus. Each genius claims the other stole his idea. So that brings us up to 1704. So I do want to also, that's our timeline. I'm going to read a little bit to you about the actual city of London from this book that I told you about, because I think you'll find it also very interesting when we've got these great minds who are coming up with these theories, and everything else is, well, as described in this book. So let me just give you a little insight into the world of these geniuses. And this is from, again, the Clockwork universe. Let me see what my time is here. Okay. Here we go. Few ages could have seemed less likely than the late 1600s to start men dreaming of a world of perfect order. Historians would later talk of the age of genius, but the age of tumult would have been just as fitting. In the tail end of Shakespeare's century, the natural and the supernatural still twined around one another. Disease was a punishment ordained by God. Astronomy had not yet broken free from astrology, and the sky was filled with omens. The only man-made light came from flickering flames and sputtering lanterns. Unless the moon was out, nights were dark and dangerous. Thieves and muggers prowled the streets. The first police forces lay far in the future, and brave souls who ventured outdoors carried their own lanterns or hired a link boy to light the way with a torch made from a hunk of fat soaked rope. The murder rate was 5 times as high as it is today. Even in midday, cities were murky and grimy. Coal smoke left a sooty crust or fur on all it touched. London was one of the world's great cities and a center of the new learning, but it was, in one historian's words, a stinking, muddy, filth-bespattered metropolis. Huge piles of human waste blocked city streets, and butchers added heaps of the soil and filth of their slaughterhouses to the towering mounds. Ignorance made matters worse. The same barges that brought vegetables to the city from farms in the countryside returned laden with human sewage to fertilize the fields. When Shakespeare and his fellow investors built the Globe Theater in 1599, the splendid new building held at least 2,000 people, but was constructed without a single toilet. Well over a century later, hygiene had scarcely improved. At about the time of Louis XIV's death in 1715, a new rule was put in place requiring that the corridors in the palace at Versailles be cleaned of feces once a week. No one bathed, from kings to peasants. The poor had no choice and the wealthy had no desire. Doctors explained that water opened the pores to infection and plague. A coat of grease and grime sealed disease away. Worms, fleas, lice, and bedbugs were near universal afflictions. Science would soon revolutionize the world, but the minds that made the modern world were yoked to itchy, smelly, dirty bodies. On the public stage, all was crisis and calamity. Through the early part of the century, Germany had suffered through what would later be called the 30 Years' War. The blandness of the name obscures the horror of a religious war where one raping, looting, marauding army gave way to another endlessly, and where famine and disease followed close on the army's heels. England had been convulsed by a civil war. In London in 1649, a shocked crowd looked on as the royal executioner lifted his axe high and chopped off the king's head. In 1650s, plague swept across Europe. In 1665, it jumped the channel to England. In the wings, the events that would reshape the world went on unnoticed. Few knew and few cared about a handful of curious men studying the heavens and scribbling equations in their notebooks. Humans had recognized nature's broad patterns from the beginning. Night follows day. The moon waxes and wanes. The stars form their familiar constellations. The seasons recur. But they had noticed, too, that no 2 days were identical. Men expected the sun to rise, wrote Alfred North Whitehead, but the wind bloweth where it listeth. If people referred to laws of nature, they had in mind not true laws, but something akin to rules of thumb, guidelines subject to exceptions and interpretation. Then at some point in the 1600s, a new idea came into the world. The notion was that the natural world not only follows rough and ready patterns, but also exact, formal, mathematical laws. Though it looked haphazard and sometimes chaotic, the universe was in fact an intricate and perfectly regulated clockwork. From the cosmically vast to the infinitesimally small, every aspect of the universe had been meticulously arranged. God had created the world and designed its every feature, and he continued to supervise it with minute care. He had set the planets in orbit and lavished care on every one of a housefly's 1,000 eyes. He had chosen the perfect rate for the Earth's spin and the ideal thickness for a walnut shell. Nature's laws were vast in range, but few in number. God's operating manual filled only a line or two. When Isaac Newton learned how gravity works, for instance, he announced not merely a discovery, but a universal law that embraced every object in creation. The same law regulated the moon in its orbit round the earth, an arrow arcing against the sky, an apple falling from a tree, and it described their motions not only in general terms, but precisely and quantitatively. God, let me say it again, God was a mathematician. 17th century scientists firmly believed he had written his laws in a mathematical code. Their task was to find the key. My focus in this book is largely on the climax of the story, especially Newton's unveiling in 1687 of his theory of gravitation. But Newton's astonishing achievement built on the work of such titans as Descartes, Galileo, and Kepler, who themselves had deciphered paragraphs and even whole pages of God's cosmic code. And that's the beginning of this book. So believe me, I think it'll be worth your money. So what I want to do over here on the whiteboard is show you a few things that you might find interesting. These are the scientists, and I've also given you a little bit about the environment. But let me introduce the people to you. So this man is Kepler, and his time period is 1571 to 1630. Now Kepler found 6 planets during his lifetime. He knew that Earth was not the only inhabitable planet. He knew there was a sun. He knew the Earth had a moon. But again, and if you look in his hand, he's got a very rudimental compass that you would use almost, when you've seen even movies with ships that are sailing on the seas. They mark how far they go with this kind of an instrument. So there's the instruments that these different men use, and to me that makes them a scientist. They're not just thinkers, they're actually trying to use math, numbers, and calculate what's going on and how come the Earth is going around, how come the planets are going and he believed it was in a circular motion. And later scientists understand it's elliptical, and some of the rotations around different celestial spheres are not circles, they're elliptical like an egg. This man is the one that we are talking about, who also was a competitor of this man. And this is Isaac Newton. He has his 3 laws of motion that we study when we study physics. And you can see him, he has his instruments also. He has his telescope, he has a prism that shows that light is made up of the different values that we would call like a rainbow, all the different colors. In this painting of him, there's the apple that is suggested fell when he was sitting under an apple tree, and that's when he decided something made it fall, not just go up into the heavens. And that what was it is what led him to his idea of gravity. But that's Newton. And then I also mentioned Gottfried Leibniz, and and you could see his hair and his style of dressing dates him as a 1600 man, a 17th century man. In the back, though, you will also see there are these mathematical looking, what can I even call it, graphs and things, where they're trying to understand it mathematically. They believe in a God. They totally believe in God. And it's almost like they're trying to prove of God's existence, because it's so difficult for a man to understand why things act the way they do, that they believe it has to be some sort of a mathematical solution that they have to, if they can just crack it and come up with a formula that works all the time, they're actually getting into God's head. And and in this time period, when we look back at it, it's amazing to me that these are not men of science who don't believe in a God. They totally believe in a God, and they're trying to prove that God has made a pattern. It's not just chaos. It's not just the Big Bang. They're saying that there's a formula, and they just haven't found it yet. And so they are, I find it very interesting that they are true believers in God, and they are just trying to understand God's formula. And as soon as they figure that out, they'll know what God knows, or something. You know, I mean, it's kind of, that's a little bit of a heresy too, in a way. I have to show you a couple of other things because I did mention steampunk. So in that book that I showed you that I have, a lot of things have to do with time, because you may know this or not, Einstein was actually a mathematician. We call him a scientist, but he was a mathematician. Most scientists that we revere in modern day times, even now, are mathematicians. And the idea of time is actually something that has been determined not just by scientists, but by people who were sailing on ships. They use longitude and latitude, and they've come up with the idea of how long did it take them to get from one port to another. So there's a lot of books about that too, as to how, what is time? You know, I mean, it's it depends on what the measurement you use. Is it your wristwatch you're using, or is it some extravagant timepiece? Is it a grandfather clock that has a pendulum that keeps it going? So time is also a big question for all these scientists. So with steampunk, we look at time pieces. Watches are pretty ingenious. And the idea of a clock, you've got all those gears going on. So there's always a lot of gears with the fashions that steampunkers are making for themselves. I do want to present this to you as another possibility that I want you to look up online if you're interested. This is one of my favorites. It's a book character called Victoria, and she's very much a Victorian girl. This is now into the steampunk, not necessarily the 1600s. This is more 1800s. But she's a Victorian girl, and her pet is an octopus. So it's Victoria and Otto, and it's a creation of a man named Brian Kessinger, K-E-S-I-N-G-E-R. And you can look it up, and you'll find that she's called a tea girl. She has her tea. She's very British, but she's also very Victorian and very steampunk, because she, like you can see with her outfit, she's not Victorian. She's steampunk because she has her goggles. She has her weapon back here, and she has her octopus as a pet, giving respect to the fact that there is no other creature like an octopus. And I find that it's a fun book to read. And the octopus helps her get her corset laced up and things like that. So I'm just fooling around here, but you'll enjoy steampunk. Some of the things that, I'm going to come back over here now. But give us some thought about what the conditions are that we're living through now, because we have another pandemic. These have come and gone throughout the Bible. You'll see plagues and things that have come and hit humans. And in the Bible, of course, it does seem to be God-directed. We know now that a lot of the plagues are the result of something going wrong, a mutation of some sort. This coronavirus is suggested as being what is called a spillover from an animal virus that doesn't kill an animal, but it will kill a human. So we've had others before, the swine flu, as it was called, the 1918 flu. If you look at the different times that these come, you can almost make a timeline of the different times that plagues have hit. And at times they are plagues that are centered in a certain place. But when we have like the coronavirus now, we call it a pandemic because it's worldwide. And we've had other pandemics that have occurred. But what you'll find very interesting, and it's in this book that I just was reading from too, Dr. Fauci didn't come up with just his own CDC idea of wearing a mask and staying 6 feet apart and washing your hands. This is something that was known after the 1600s when Leeuwenhoek found his little animals in a microscope. He realized that but it takes a while for people to understand what the scientists are saying. And if they're not publishing like Newton did, and it's just word of mouth, when they talk about him, imagine what they must have thought of Leeuwenhoek. They must have thought he had gotten into his brandy, and I found a world of little animals. They're in that drop of water. They must have laughed at him and thought he might need to go to an asylum for a little while. He had been working too hard. But the fact is that the ones that pursue their question and then they are able to produce evidence are the ones that are believed finally. And you heard about how filthy the world was in 1600, where the idea of washing your hands with soap is the best thing you can do. And we're told that now. Wash your hands. It seems so simple, but it doesn't seem to be logical for some reason. But since 1600, that's been the prescribed way to stay healthy. And wear a mask if it's spread by droplets, So the idea that God is punishing us has been replaced, hopefully, by science. And it's again, there are different theories and things that are still floating around as to what will work and what won't work and when it will go away. We do know there are scientists we can look at that have come up with vaccines. We know that if you get the right combination, it can save lives. We no longer, what most of the people my age had to get measles vaccinations and chicken pox, or we had the disease, that sort of thing. But vaccines are also welcomed when they are happening. So next week, you can expect another Christmas offering from me. And do we have a call? Hello?
Hello there, Linda.
Hi, is it Eric?
Yes, it is.
Oh, good. Have you been enjoying the show?
Yeah, I just got on around 3:30. It was kind of interesting about what you were saying about time and science about diseases and that back in those days that some people didn't understand it right away, but they did after a while. And it's just like today, like you're saying today, people, it takes a while to understand science. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Wanted to call you to say that. It was very interesting.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to hear that you've been joining me with this.
Yeah,
because
I didn't know we have a telephone number on there.
Yeah.
So it was very, very, very good. We need to learn about that, about all diseases, and that God allows certain things, but we still got hope because God is something to do with the universe and all that. Thank you to talk about that.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate your call.
And I'm finally really understanding a little bit more.
Great. So. Well, hopefully we'll be back in school next week.
Okay. I'll see you then. Bye.
Okay, Eric. Thank you.
Keep up the good work. I like your outfit.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Maybe we need a steampunk party. We should have a steampunk party.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Eric. Well, that's one of my students. Thank you, Eric, for calling. I appreciate that. But that's the thing. So next week, I want to do a Dickens short story called The Gift of the... I'm sorry, not Dickens. O. Henry. And I think you'll find him very interesting. It's called The Gift of the Magi. And so you can, if you can find it online, please read it on your own. Otherwise, we'll be talking about what the value really is of Christmas. And as you know, Santa's coming, but the idea that it's a gift that is just given. It's the gift itself, whatever the gift is, without any idea of getting something back from Santa, that makes Christmas giving such a wonderful thing. So I think you'll enjoy that story by O. Henry, who is his whole story is, I think, interesting too. So join me next week, and we'll be doing The Gift of the Magi. So I just want to say we're remote for a couple of weeks now, but next week hopefully you'll get information on whether we're back to class on next Monday. So thank you for joining me this week, and stay safe. See you next week.